Do you really need to keep every business receipt? Maybe not, but there are some key times where you might want to hold on to those receipts to save you some stress and frustration later, especially if the IRS comes a-knocking. So which business receipts do you need to keep? Which ones don't you need to keep? And how do you keep yourself from drowning in a sea of paperwork? Hi everyone, Jamie Trull here, CPA and financial educator for true small businesses. And if you're a small business that wants to stay informed, organized, and profitable in your business finances, you are in the right place. So please make sure to subscribe. And of course, make sure to stay until the end, or I'm going to teach you my system for keeping my receipts and making things really easy. Okay, so let's get one thing out of the way. The IRS actually doesn't care if you just have a whole shoebox of all of your receipts. What they really want to know is whether you can prove that those are business deductions. And while bank statements and credit cards can show transactions, which is helpful to show that you actually did spend the money, they don't necessarily tell the IRS what you actually spent it on. And that's where receipts can come in. And that means you don't need to keep everything, but you do need to keep the right things. So which receipts do you need to keep? I'm going to break it down into a couple categories and tell you why these might be the types of receipts that you should keep around. Now, the first category of receipts that you're going to want to keep is meals and entertainment. Now, unfortunately, these are a little bit different. Meals are treated differently than entertainment is for tax purposes. And entertainment, like taking a client to a ball game or getting a suite at a concert, unfortunately isn't going to count as a deductible business expense anyway. However, meals are generally 50% deductible. That said, there has to be a true business reason for the meal. And when it comes to meals, receipts are helpful. However, they don't tell the whole story. And that's because even if you are deducting a trip to Outback because you took a client out to dinner there, the IRS doesn't know whether or not you took your client or you just went out with your family to enjoy a bloomin' onion. So in the case of meals, it is key that you don't just keep the receipts, but that you actually write the business purpose of the meal on the receipt or somewhere where you're keeping it. So that might be in an accounting system where you just jot a note into the memo field, or you can actually write it directly on the receipt and take a picture of it. In order for them to agree that this is an okay deduction, the IRS under audit would want to see who you had the meal with, why this was a business meal, what that business purpose was, and when and where it happened. This type of documentation is especially important when it comes to meals. And that's because just looking at the receipt really doesn't tell the IRS anything as to why it's truly a business deduction. So keep those receipts, but more importantly, make sure you have documented somewhere the reason for the expense. The second category of receipts you should definitely keep are purchases over $75. While you should generally keep receipts for meals no matter the cost, you will want to keep receipts for any other expenses that are over $75. So that could be equipment, software licenses, courses, advertising, anything like that. And these are often your largest deductions, so you want to make sure that you are keeping those. Now, whether your tax accountant or bookkeeper cares to see them is completely up to them. However, if you are ever audited, the IRS will definitely want to see them. And once again, it's a good idea, especially if it's not completely evident by the nature of the expense, to document why it's considered a business expense. The third category where you should be keeping all of your receipts is travel and mileage. Travel expenses should be documented with receipts for things like airfare, rental cars, hotels, and more. And once again, we need to document what the business purpose of the trip actually was. Just saving a bill from, say, Marriott without any context as to why you were there in the first place and why it relates to your business is not going to pass muster when it comes to the IRS. Now, when it comes to mileage and car expenses, this is where you're going to want to talk to your tax accountant about the best way for you to capture those costs. Oftentimes, small business owners choose to go the mileage route, which essentially means that rather than keeping all of those receipts for all of the fuel that you're putting in your car, instead you are keeping track of the mileage that you are spending traveling from place to place for business. Some business owners, however, do opt to deduct actual expenses on their vehicle. So again, talk to your tax accountant about what makes the most sense for you. And the fourth thing I would probably keep receipts for are those recurring subscription expenses. Now, technically, small recurring charges may not always require receipts. However, if you are ever audited, making sure that you are showing them those receipts can help to validate the fact that they were business expenses. Now, thankfully, in this day and age, a lot of times we get receipts to our email, or we can log into a system, let's say, and pull down a receipt at any time. So that means that you don't necessarily need to be saving every single receipt every single month for all of your subscription services. However, this is where it can help to have it at least documented somewhere, either in an accounting system or somewhere where you will be able to find it, what the purpose of that expense is. All right, so now let's talk about what expenses you don't need a receipt for. So that would include things like small expenses under $75, unless they are meal or travel related, in which case the dollar amount doesn't matter. You also won't necessarily need receipts for things like utility bills, because your statements should work in that case. Additionally, it's less important to keep receipts for something where the business purpose is very clear just by the expense. So for example, if you're using a software that is very clearly for your business use, you may not need to be keeping receipts for things like that. Of course, it's never a bad idea to save our receipts. However, again, the most important thing is to be able to prove the business purpose of the thing you purchase. So if that's unclear by the nature of what you purchased, that means you probably should save the receipt and do a little extra documentation on top of it. And here's one little bonus tip for you when it comes to travel expenses. Because meals are taxed differently than other travel expenses like hotels, you do want to make sure that you are treating them differently. So for instance, if you got that Marriott bill, however, you had room service delivered to you, the IRS is going to want to see you deduct the room service as meals and categorize the actual hotel stay as hotel. On a practical basis, a lot of times we don't do that as business owners. If we see a transaction come through our QuickBooks as Marriott, we're probably going to put it all to hotel. However, if we are ever audited, that is something that they would look at. So it could make sense to go ahead and divide that out separately. Or you can be like me and just don't charge anything to the room and use your credit card for that separately. So now the practical question, how do we actually save and store these receipts without losing our dang mind? Thankfully, there are so many different ways to do that in this day and age. Now, I want to help you get rid of that shoebox of receipts and going forward, do this the more tech-forward way. We live in a world where there are lots of digital ways to do this, and they can keep things organized without having total chaos on your hands. That is why I love using systems that allow me to just take a picture of a receipt, usually after I've documented the business purpose on it, and upload and attach it to the specific expense. Now, you could do this in most accounting softwares, especially the ones that I recommend. And there's also some business banking platforms that will allow you to do this as well. Specifically, my favorite business banking platform that I've talked about on this channel and that I actually use is Relay, and they have this receipt capture functionality built in. And if you make this a habit, that means no more digging through your email inbox trying to figure out what an expense was for $42 3 months ago. If you're curious about checking out Relay further, definitely make sure to use my partner link so that you get some extra perks, jamietrull.com/relay. Or if you want to dig in a little bit more to some of the accounting softwares that I recommend, they all have a receipt capture functionality. You can check out my quiz to help match you with the right accounting software for your business and your needs at jamietrull.com/accounting quiz. Keeping your receipts does not have to be complicated, and you definitely don't need to do it perfectly. It's about knowing what matters and having a system to keep you organized. If you've got specific questions about whether you need to keep receipts for certain transactions, make sure to ask me down below, and I'll see you next time.